Welcome to the Family Financial Conversation, an Advisorpedia-powered podcast about the decisions families make as they age that involve money, but might revolve around very different things. Listen in for thoughts from industry experts on getting the best possible outcomes from those decisions through the lens of great financial advice. We are all entering this age of longevity together. Let's begin.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Family Financial Conversation. I'm your host, Tom West. And in just a second, I'm going to introduce my fantastic co-host, Suzanne Schmitt. But a quick outline of what we're going to be doing this morning. We're going to be examining, as a way to kick off the Family Financial Conversation Center of Excellence at advisorpedia.com. We're going to be starting off discussing family decision-making in the time of longevity. And this podcast is aimed at advisors that are trying to do three things. First and foremost, to serve their clients better, but with a keen eye on how retention of their existing book, maybe retention of assets for future generations, and the all-important organic growth of their business. Those are going to be the mainstays of what we're going to be coming back to. So, by way of introduction to myself, everybody, I'm a practitioner and I'm an advisor first. So like a lot of you in the audience, I've got clients, I've got compliance, I've got changing markets, I've got a limited bandwidth with the other advisors on my team to try to process all of the different things to be able to get me through 2024, which we're kicking off right now. Thank goodness for educators like Suzanne Schmitt, whose job and career has really been around orienting advisors like me to pay attention to what's going on in the broader environment. What are the different things that we need to pay attention to in the way the market, particularly the aging market, and now the age of longevity is changing? So with that as a setup, Suzanne, in your experience, good morning, Suzanne, first off.
Good morning. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. In your experience, going into 2024, tell the audience a little bit about what advisors really need to know about the universe of longevity and what the big financial institutions are trying to teach them.
A fantastic question. And let's just dive right in at the deep end of the pool, shall we? So in terms of what advisors and frankly their clients need to know relative to longevity, we are all living longer, but not necessarily better. And that means that advisors and clients need to have real and meaningful conversations about what it means to age well, that include things like aging in place, managing through chronic health conditions, divorce later in life, and what that can mean for the changing face of blended families. Second acts, where we know that more people are working through quote unquote traditional retirement years. And last but not least, what does housing look like for folks as they age? So that's a pretty fulsome list, but those are all things that should be top of mind for advisors because they are definitely top of mind for clients.
Sure. Well, I'm putting myself in my advisor role for a second. How come it's so hard to get advisors to pay attention to this stuff when we've got all of this compelling ever-present research that everybody's getting older and priorities are changing? How come it's so hard for advisors to kind of get this message to the top of their list?
Yeah, I think there's three reasons. One, advisors are busy. And busy generally means they're seeing a lot of clients. You mentioned earlier, they have a lot of masters to serve. And aging conversations are not necessarily linear, right? They're hard. Very few of us want to talk about growing older because our traditional assumptions around aging are generally that means that we're not doing as well, right? We are limited in mobility, maybe. We're limited in what we can do for work. And those are tough conversations. And lastly, and maybe most importantly, very few people age alone. And by that, I mean, as we grow older, our relationships and our interdependencies, both physical, emotional, even financial, those change too. And that means that an advisor who might have had a one-to-one or a one-to-two client relationship with both members of a household, if there are two, now suddenly has to think about, or at least we would hope they would be thinking about, who else is in that family that they might need to pull into their inner circle. And those can be challenging conversations, right? Family dynamics don't go away when kids get older. as their parents start to lean on children and grandchildren a little bit more, all those old family dynamics come back to the forefront. So for all of those reasons, these can be difficult conversations to navigate for advisors. And ultimately, those are primary reasons I've seen, at least, why advisors can be reticent to take them on.
Yeah, and I think when I'm thinking about managing my practice and managing my clients, like I'm going to admit early in this podcast, sometimes it's difficult to see that mastery of some of these topics, mastery of these kinds of disciplines, really makes a difference in the business that I'm running. Like I'm not a social worker. I need to pay attention to retaining existing clients, whether I'm in a fee type of setup or a commission or a hybrid or an insurance model or whatever it might be. Some of these things might feel a little bit esoteric and touchy-feely, and there might not be an obvious connection with the way that I'm able to retain clients through perhaps a disability or a death, certainly through a second generation, or can I use some of these concepts to be able to aggregate more wallet share and drive more organic growth? I think for the audience, that's something this podcast is very specifically going to be focusing on. Not just giving you a situational awareness about how the market is really signaling to us where consumer preferences are going, but also how advisors can translate that practically in ways that drive retention and new business acquisition. Let's drill in a little bit more, Suzanne. Let's think a little bit about family decision-making. And one of the areas that I have been challenged with in my career is recognizing that during an extended lifetime, the way that families make decisions changes. The way they make decisions about money change, and those money decisions aren't necessarily about money. They might be about other things. They might be about family role or independence or trying to protect kids from things that they don't understand or any of a litany of different reasons. Can you talk a little bit about family decision-making and how the environment is shifted and decision-making changes a lot of times as we get older?
Before I do that, though, I want to go back to a point that you made, and that is around aggregation and consolidation of households. And I think that sometimes we as an industry think that engaging kids or additional generations of a household is hard. What I would respectfully submit is perhaps that is not as hard as finding new clients. And so the opportunity here, I think, is really to help advisors perhaps have fewer, better relationships with more client families that are multiple generations. So I just wanted to headline with that. In terms of family decision-making, though, I would bucket family decision-making into three different categories. And oftentimes these roles are held by different people in the family. So you've got, first and foremost, family financial decisions. And even though the face, if you would, of financial management is changing, we know certainly more women coming out of the boomer generation and Xers have held not just full-time work, but in many cases, increasingly, are the primary breadwinner in the household. So we've got the family financial decisions that we want to care for. Secondly, we've got what I'll call just really that healthcare bucket. So who in the family is really tasked with making household level health-related decisions that can stem from changes in chronic conditions, that can stem from simple longevity-related considerations, but also that start to get into considerations around people's mental capacity. And then finally, we'll talk about, I would say the third category is really lifestyle. So what does living well look like? What does living safely look like? What does the household actually look like? And again, those are three different sets, if you would, of decisions that are oftentimes guided by different people within the household. And so particularly as we think about clients aging, we should not, as advisors or advisor support, assume that it is one person driving all three of those decisions. It is really important for advisors and their staff to understand who is on point within that household for making each of those various decisions.
I think it's a great place to start. And I'm 10 minutes into this podcast, and I'm going to go counter-programming for a second as an advisor. I tend to struggle very much with a lot of the conventional wisdom that is coming out of financial industry research about the path that advisors need to take would be to try to capture this holistic model that encompasses everything that you just talked about, Suzanne, the personal, the psychosocial, the financial, the healthcare, and roll it all up into this wellness bucket that somehow is going to deepen my client relationships. as an advisor, I struggle very much with what I see is sort of a default programming in human beings to procrastinate making sometimes critical decisions on so many of these different fronts. I mean, I'm an advisor, I'm a planner, and I don't personally have all this stuff taken care of. I haven't had all the conversations with my parents who are in their 70s and 80s or my kids. And I do a pretty good job as a professional, but I think that advisors and people that are learning from this call perhaps need to shift. And how do I be more present and strategically reactive when our clients transition into changes in the way that families are making decisions in those same categories that you talked about, Suzanne? I think that move, that theme, is going to be very present in this whole financial or family financial conversation center of excellence for Advisorpedia, which is, look, this is not trying to position a bucket of wellness on all aspects of human existence. This is tactically how from different categories, advisors can be selectively reactive, to be present, to not be a bystander when families are going through these transitions, and to have a role in the shifting of the hierarchy of priorities with the clients as they're going through things. And we'd like to think that that is a really good conceptual shift from a way that a lot of these things in longevity is talked about. Suzanne, comment a little bit on how that might be a little bit different than what you've seen, the way that these concepts have been presented to advisors in the past.
Yeah, I appreciate your candor and your transparency. And before we are whatever our profession is, we're all human beings, and most human beings are overwhelmed by the pace of life. So I think what I'm unpacking from your observation and what I've seen personally is these conversations can be all encompassing and overwhelming. So to try to care for every single aspect of mind, body, money, spirit, no one can do that. Advisors are not social workers. They're not doctors. So I think what the industry is really starting to figure out is, how do you create conversational support resources that can help with some of the, I'll say, softer skills that we are not necessarily taught as humans, let alone as advisors, support staff, or whatever our vocation may be. So I think really beginning with understanding what is important to a client and what is important to a family can be a great way to open the door and start to chunk out, if you would, the various decisions that are going to happen. Look, for some clients, it is very much cut and dry, and it is going to be about the money, and they really just want to work with their advisor around their financial life. Not all clients are going to be like that. So starting by understanding deeply what matters, who matters to your client can be a great way of letting them help guide you. And then taking advantage, I think, of some of the resources that are more often than not coming up from our healthcare community providers around how to have difficult conversations can be a great way to do something that we're not all as human beings very comfortable doing. So I would cite specifically the Conversation Project is an amazing resource for individuals who really need to have difficult conversations first with themselves, then with their family and their advisors around what does good look like for them, particularly as they think about healthcare changes. Let me take a beat there and give you a chance to react to that, see if that resonates.
Well, I mean, I think the first piece that I've learned from in my career, so I've had a 25 plus year career with some levels of success in this longevity area. And it's interesting that you get a bead from the medical community, because I think in terms of framing ways to communicate with clients through changing priorities that are related to health and have financial implications, I've learned a lot from the way that, in particular, for example, oncologists coach and doctor their clients to accept calls to action with sometimes difficult treatments. And what are the exact steps to get the highest degree of compliance for their patients to be able to get the best, highest likelihood of good outcomes? And a lot of it has to do with meeting the clients where they are on sort of the acceptance and the denial spectrum, for lack of a better way to put it. And for advisors that are wading into these kinds of conversations for the first time, I'll let Suzanne go back to this resource, which I had an opportunity to look at beforehand. But just as one last thought on my end, meeting the clients where they are and not prescribing actions outside of your range of expertise, but being able to repeat back and acknowledge the circumstances that the clients are in. What advisors need to understand is this is your opportunity to redo discovery. Your client that is in this healthcare change, this family decision-making change, is no longer your old client. You have a new client in front of you that is reacting to new things, new medical stresses, new age stresses, longevity stresses that are going to have different roles and responsibilities for money. And my opinion, the one thing that advisors do a crummy job is reprofile their clients aggressively at points of change. But I think that the idea of having, advisors have tools like, well, how do I even be present for this conversation and not get sort of pushed out of the room by family that doesn't think that I have a role at all? Maybe use some of the examples on the resource that you cited here about how advisors can be present and position themselves to serve the next articulated financial priority that is right around the corner.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. And if I could go back to the notion of being present, I think we are trained, particularly folks in medical and financial services, to always have an answer. And there are some things in life that honestly don't happen for a reason and for which there is simply not a good answer. So I think what you're getting at, Tom, is taking a moment to be with the client, to be with them where they are, and to not be inauthentic in what we know and what we don't know. So giving advisors more and better resources to lean on, which they in turn can share with clients, I think is really pivotal. And having spent a lot of my adult and working life in the space of aging and longevity, really helping clients think through, especially at the precipice of a major health event or a loss, what's important to them. What does living a good life look like, especially in the face of a diagnosis or a loss? What does living safely look like? Who should be their trusted contact? We know several years ago, the industry went through, really as a result of FINRA 4512, a shift towards getting trusted contacts onto accounts. What does it look like to identify somebody in your life who might be a friend or a family member who can be with you and who can be a part of the advisor's inner circle with that client? And lastly, I would say conversational resources around how to navigate particularly end of life and end aging issues can be tremendously important to be able to share with the client who isn't necessarily going to work through them with you as the advisor, but who can take that and have then a script or a guide to determine what does living well look like? Where do I want to be? Who do I want to be in my life? What sort of interventions might I want? All of which, to state the obvious, are going to have implications on their financial plan and also on their relationship with you as their advisor. So I cite the Conversation Project simply to say, I think they have amazing resources. I've worked with them at a few of my former employers. And I think the beauty of introducing those resources to a client is both a recognition authentically that you know what's going on in the person's life. You don't get over your skis per se as an advisor because you're not advising psychologically, but you are occurring to that client in the form of help. And you are becoming that, we frequently say quarterback in financial services, but you are connecting that client with resources who can help them live their best life and communicate what is really important to you in that moment. So I think that's the pinnacle of meeting a client where they are.
I think that's fantastic. Most of us that have had some measure of success in the industry are typically coming out of either sales backgrounds or analytical backgrounds. And some of this high EQ stuff can feel a few different degrees of separation away from an advisor. So I just want to take a moment to encourage advisors, you can do this. And I think that the idea of just looking back over the course of the last year or two in your own book of business, and which of these clients that you had, are you already having different aspects of this conversation to begin with? Like one small call to action that I want to give everybody is, take a look at your existing book right now, and I want you to look for two things. The first one is, see if you can track and distinguish your clients that you have had these conversations with, and you'd be able to say and articulate what the most important things are with these clients as it relates to health and family. Because being able to take those priorities, repeat them back to clients so there is a shared understanding of what the hierarchy of most important things is, that's the way that you set up the call to action, which is going to be using more of your sales skills and marrying it with the analytical tools that you have as a financial professional. And I'll give you an example. Mary, you talked after your husband's fall, the most important thing is to stay at home no matter what. After listening carefully to your input from your family, your input from doctors and caregivers, there's got to be some changes that are going to need to be made so that your house is supportive and enabling to your husband's new mobility issues. That's going to require some different decisions that are going to involve money. We're going to have to be doing zero threshold landings. We're going to have to be changing around the way that different parts of the house are set up. And that's going to require some changes in the way that we're doing investments. In particular, recognize that a lot of these things that we're talking about are Schedule A itemized medical expense deductions. We can deduct them. That's going to have some implications on the way we set the portfolio up and so on. But the most important thing, Mary, remember is you want to stay home as much as possible and give you and your husband a path towards independence and safety on your own terms. And that's why we got to do all the money stuff. Those are the kinds of things, audience, that you can do by making sure that you understand what the health and the family priorities are first, and then use that as a position to a call to action that involves analytical work that really brings your professional discipline about portfolios and management, cash flow, and taxes to bear. So we're coming up on time. I wanted to at least give Suzanne one last sort of perspective to you. If you could wish for advisors in this audience to come away with one thought that could get them focused, I've got one thought too, that can get them focused on starting this new year with a renewed focus on longevity and the opportunities that it presents them by way of retention, maybe for a primary generation or second generation, what would that last thought be for this morning's podcast?
It's the thought and a half, Tom. One is understand what aging well looks like to your clients individually, and understand who aging well will entail or encompass for those clients, because I think that is the gateway to the kinds of conversations we're really talking about and can absolutely change the tone and tenor of a relationship, not just with the client, but with the people who matter most. And I think this is an opportunity for you as an advisor to get to know who matters to your clients, because they should ultimately matter to you and they can become part of your book.
Oh, that's fantastic. And my last observation and a call to action. Advisors need to have a better understanding of how their book of business, how their group of clients is really changing in real time. So I would challenge my audience of advisors to go back to your book of business, particularly those that are managing wealth and have a book of business that you measure in terms of dollars managed. And I'd invite you to look at something in particular. What is your average age-weighted dollar? Meaning, of your book of business, certainly there's a concentration of wealth at the higher age ranges. Get a sense on what, on average, is the age of your client dollar. The concept is you should be able to anticipate, if the average client dollar is age 61, what the highest likelihood of changing priorities are going to be T plus 5 years. But if, like me, you've got an age weighting in the dollars in your practice that are probably pushing towards mid-late 70s, that's going to be very different in terms of anticipating where your client priorities are going to go. That's what the Family Financial Conversation is about, getting you ready for those changes with clients and being able to meet them with practical steps that are going to be able to drive organic growth and client retention. That's what you have to look forward to on this podcast. Looking forward to seeing you again on the Family Financial Conversation at advisorpedia.com. And don't forget to click the link that is posted with this on that conversation resource that Suzanne put together for us. Thanks everybody for joining us, and look forward to talking with you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Family Financial Conversation podcast. The information covered in the posted represents the views and opinions of the guests and do not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Signature Estate and Investment Advisors. Disclosure: Signature Estate and Investment Advisors, LLC, is an SEC-registered investment advisor. However, such registration does not imply a certain level of skill or training, and no inference to the contrary should be made. Securities offered through Signature Estate Securities, Inc., member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through SEIA, LLC, 2121 Avenue of the Stars, Suite 1600, Los Angeles, California, 90016. Telephone number 310-712-2323.